Right. So we'll go ahead and start the presentations a little bit early. I know Xander might be able to stretch this into the whole slot anyway. So let me go ahead and present Xander Jenkins, who is our first speaker.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Xander Jenkins, and this was my summer project on making a comprehensive spectral energy distribution library of type 1a supernovae for the STS exposure time calculator. That is a mouthful. I'm so sorry. It's really not that bad. We'll get there. So first big question, how can we observe supernovae in the UV? So UV astronomy is quite difficult. You can't really do much of it on the ground, really, because of our atmosphere. And so you're kind of stuck using space telescopes. And even within space telescopes, there's not really that many of them that can observe in the UV. So you don't have a ton of choices, but we are a bit biased here at the Institute. And so a good choice is STS, the Space Telescope Imaging Spectrograph, which was developed right here at Space Telescope and is currently on Hubble. It can see in both the optical and the UV, so it's a great choice, and that's what we're going to be using here. So the thing is about STS and its UV detector, STS is great because it has UV detectors, and it's one of the few space telescopes that can see in the UV, but compared to its optical detectors, it's quite sensitive, and so they're much more sensitive than the optical detectors, and they're much more easily blown out if they look at things that are too bright. And so the big question here is, how do we keep STS safe? That's really important. We want to keep the detectors safe, and we want to make sure that everything's good. Well, there is already a measure in place to do this with the exposure time calculator, or the ETC. So when you submit a proposal to observe with STS, part of that process is calculating the exposure time to ensure the instrument safety. And when you do that, this is just a snippet of the web page, you have to choose a spectral distribution. And so you can upload your own spectrum. There's a bunch of different stellar options, but for supernovae, we're going to go down here to non-stellar options. And if you see in this list, scroll down to the S section, but there's no supernovae, so there's no option to select a preset template for any type of supernovae at all. And so if you do want to observe supernovae with STS, you're going to have to upload your own spectrum. And that's fine. It works. It's good for now. But the sort of big issue with this is time. So it takes, first of all, the person proposing has to get their own spectra and make sure that it's good and all of that. But when they upload that spectra, they're doing this with the idea of, I want my data, I'm submitting my proposal, not with the safety of the instrument in mind. And so the contact scientists who are reviewing these proposals, who do have the safety of the instrument in mind, they don't know about things like supernova physics or the different types of supernovae and the light evolution. They don't know these things, and they're not supposed to. That's not their job, right? They keep the instrument safe. And so this just kind of results in a lot of back and forth and a lot of extra time. And when observing supernovae, time is of the essence. We really, if you want to get it a certain number of days before or after maximum light, the explosion only happens once, and so you got to get it when you got to get it. So this sort of makes a lot of time. So it'd be a lot easier then if you could just pick an option. And so this summer, I developed a template for type 1a supernovae, the brightest kind, to go in there, and it will make observations of 1a supernovae with STS much quicker, much easier, and safer for the instrument. So let me back up a little bit here. I've sort of been throwing terms and jargon at you and stuff. So supernovae, if you do not know, supernovae are the explosions of stars. Type 1a are the brightest kind exploding from white dwarfs. And type 1a supernovae historically are pretty significant in terms of astronomy. They were used as standard candles to measure the expansion of the universe because they were so bright. And they were good enough and pretty much all standard enough back then for that. But these days we know that type 1a supernovae are not so standard. They are not all the same, and they vary a lot, but they are standardizable. And so we use a couple different things to classify them, mainly when you observe it, the current time. So you can see on the x-axis here, before versus after peak brightness, the time at which we're currently observing it, and the luminosity. So, as you can see, the ones at the top, the luminosity declines slowly. They stay brighter for longer. The ones at the bottom decline pretty quickly and lose their brightness pretty fast. So we can sort of categorize them in this way. And the thing about 1a supernovae is in the UV, they have features that are not shown elsewhere. So the metal abundance of the star before it explodes is not found in other bands at all, but it is shown to be found in the UV. So if you want to categorize the metallicity of the star before it exploded, you're going to have to observe in the UV. And so we want to make more observations of these things, but we want to make it easier. And so back to the question, how am I going to do that? So Kapora. Kapora is a software created by my wonderful advisor, Matt. And basically what Kapora does is it takes hundreds of different spectra that you have of type 1a supernovae, takes them all and turns them into a single composite spectra. So as you can see here at the top, it's a single spectra with high and low confidence intervals, and there's a couple of statistics on the bottom, and it does this through some inverse variance weighted averaging and a bunch of other stuff. But basically, we take a bunch of spectra, we turn it into one, which is great. The problem is that before I started this summer, Kapora only has, so these are all the different sources that Kapora has in it, less than 4% of them are in the UV. And as we're going to see later, that sort of means that the UV spectra is kind of a lot noisier and not as good compared to the optical. So we're going to fix that. So what did I do this summer? So during the duration of SASP, I added 54 new UV spectra, and because as a stretch goal, I finished that early enough, I also added 214 new optical spectra, but the UV is what's really important here. And hopefully this means that it has better clarity. For some context as to where I added it, so these are two histograms of the different time, observations at different times and at different luminosities, and that's before and, here we go, after. So you can see in the purple what I added, and again, there's a lot going on here, but mainly you can see the sorts of different areas where I added more at low and high luminosity specifically, and sort of the impact of what that had. This was not easy. This was certainly not a trivial thing to do. It's not as simple as you take all the spectra, you copy and you paste it and it magically makes it. As you can see, these UV spectra are very messy. I mean, it just looks bad just even looking at it. They're all over the place. They're all noisy and stuff. And so wrangling these all, cutting, trimming, cleaning, all of that stuff was not easy, but I was able to do it. So the big question is, did it work? Did it actually make the spectra better in the UV? Can we actually start using these templates? Let's find out. So this was before. So this is a type 1a supernovae at maximum light, so the worst case for our detector. This is before. So it's like pretty smooth in 3000 angstroms, right, as you enter the UV. But as you get deeper into the UV towards 2000, it really starts to get really bad and really noisy. And here's after. So you can see that it looks so much smoother and is significantly smaller in the confidence intervals. Let's overlay them real quick just so you can see both. It looks so much better and is consistent throughout the UV rather than just sort of getting really noisy the deeper you get into it, which is great. So yeah, this is the composite that I made, and this is the perfect template that we're going to be putting in. And so this will be the sort of default 1A at maximum light. But this is not all that Kapora can do. It can do so much more. So we can also change things like only look at a spectra that is later in time, earlier in time, brighter, dimmer, all that sort of stuff. And so I'm going to be showing that here. So there is a lot going on in this slide, I'm sorry, but the two main things to focus on are, one, time is going down from orange to purple on the left, and on the right, luminosity is going up from blue to green. And the main things to look here are, look at all the befores, they look really noisy, they look really messy, and look at all the afters. They look much cleaner, they're all either very smooth or significantly less noisy than they were before, and they all look consistent throughout the UV, which is excellent. So not only can we look at just max brightness, but we can also, if we want to see different brightnesses and different times, we can see all of that, which is excellent. So yeah. Given that, we take the wonderful template spectra that I made, and I will be giving that to the contact scientists so they can insert it here to make observations, faster and better and safer for the instrument for both the person proposing and the contact scientist trying to keep everything safe. And for the contact scientists, they have more options too. They don't have to know anything about supernova physics or any of that stuff and time evolution. They can just look and say, I want to look at ones later in time, earlier in time, more luminosity, dimmer, and they have all those spectra. They know how it changes without having to know anything about how they should look or what they should be, which saves everyone time. So yeah. Let's observe more type 1A supernovae in the UV with STS. Thank you.
Any questions in the room? Xander, one?
Sure.
What did you do specifically to your graph that protects the instrument? Notice that you did a spectrum. What do you do specifically to protect the instrument?
So it mainly is when you upload the spectrum and I can go back to here. So when you select the spectral distribution, the exposure time calculator does a bunch of computations and stuff, to see how many counts it will expect, right? And if the brightness will be too much for these detectors. And so basically the main idea here is that it's a template that's good enough and smooth enough to put in there so that like, I mean, like, again, if a person's uploading their own spectra and it's like super noisy, like, you know, you have no idea. And like, again, the contact scientists looking at this don't know, like, is it supposed to be noisy? Is it supposed to be smooth? Like, whatever. And so that at the end of the exposure time calculator, it'll give you a number of counts and say, like, is it high? Is it low? Like, is it good? Will it damage the detector? And basically, it's just kind of the reliability of that. And like, you know, again, you have no idea if the spectra that they upload, like, is it what's a good supernova spectra? What's a bad one? Like, you have no idea. And so the template just being there and knowing that, I mean, it looks smooth, much smoother in the UV than it did before, is, you know, that sort of keeps the instrument, like, that keeps, it helps the contact scientist trust it. And also, again, like, if it gets, I mean, you know, I just made this and you're right, there's no reason why the contact scientist should believe that it's safer. But again, if it gets used a couple times and, you know, the instrument doesn't break, then they're like, oh, like, okay, this template is good. Like, as long as people keep clicking on type 1a supernovae, like, we know it's fine, rather than guessing, right, if random people are proposing and uploading spectra. So that was kind of the main idea. So I hope that answered it. I don't work on the exposure time calculator, so I don't know all these things, but.
Is there another question? We have time for one more.
In Kapora's smoothing process, cleaning up data and
Yes.
stuff like that, is that just kind of a standard binning process, or can you speak to the?
So it, there is a lot, I guess this would be the most applicable to show. So like, there is a lot of different things going on. I mean, there's the main thing is the inverse variance weighted averaging, but it also, it normalizes all of the spectra. So like, obviously, and you can even see here, like they all kind of, this is just a random sample from before, not data that I added, but they're all kind of like follow a similar path. Like they sort of deviate and are more or less noisy. But when you first input the spectra, they're not all on the same path. And so some of them, like their peak might be at different parts. And so because we know that they're all type 1a spectra, we're like, okay, like if we see like this bump in the spectral line, like that should be here. And so it just kind of lines them all up on top of each other, as well as the spectra are also at very different resolutions. So I believe it does some sort of binning process where it like normalizes the resolution. Because again, some might be like, you know, 1,000 different points, right? Some might be 10,000, some might be, you know, so it sort of stretches and shapes them and is kind of like a binning process to get them like overlay them all on top of each other before it does the whole like averaging thing. I hope that answered.
All right. One more quick question.
So just to make sure I understand, the before spectra was of the 4% that was already in.
Yes, yeah. So this is, so it makes and this is zoomed in only on the UV, like it extends it to the optical, but this is of, so it picks spectra across all of the wavelengths, and this is it trying to make the best spectra it can with only percent of its data being in the UV. So it gets the less data it has and the lower quality of data, like the more noisy it gets. Whereas here it has way more data in the UV. So yeah, this is only that 4%.
So how did you what did you do to add, do observations? Or other
Yes.
templates?
Oh my gosh. I really should have said this. These were all STS, I should really be showing this one. These, the UV were all STS observations of type 1a supernova. Yeah, these were all, yeah, so those were all from STS, and obviously taking more of them will be quicker, but yes, so.
Great, thank you, Xander.